Ladies and gentlemen, we're really looking forward to diving into 30 years of high school football coverage here on Blue Ridge 11 Sports, and there's no better person to have that conversation with than our very own Eric May. Eric, you have to be so excited to have this conversation.
It is. Thanks, Chad. Hard to believe it's been that long, but you know what? It's kind of neat to go down memory lane and look back on some of these games.
Yeah, that's really what we're going to call it, memory lane. And before we get to some of your best memories from Warwick, Ephrata, Cocalico Manheim Central, let's just first get your thoughts on how this all started. You know, back in the early '90s, and then just how much it's changed over the last 30 years. Yeah. I mean, you have to remember what happened there, right?
Well, I do, because I remember we started out, or at least I started out, fresh out of college. Got to do radio for a number of years, but unfortunately WGSA here in Ephrata went out of business. And then that's when Bob Miller decided, you know what, we're going to pick up local sports coverage. And we started out everything on a tape delay basis. And then as technology grew and everything else, that we started doing live telecasts. And once that happened, it's off to the races.
How is it different now, 30 years later? Is there one or two things that you look back and you think that have changed so much since you first started on air here?
Well, I mean, obviously, just take a look at the cameras that we have, and what Blue Ridge has done to support, our sports coverage as far as providing us with, all the necessary equipment and, just the technology, the replay, the graphics. I look back at some of the ones from 30 years ago and what we can do today, or what you guys can do today. It really is amazing.
Yeah, and I've been looking back over the archives too, and so I'm seeing the 1995, and what it looks like. And now I'm seeing what we can do in 2023. It really has been incredible. All right, so we are going to break down your favorite high school memories into each of our local teams. We feel like that's the best plan of attack here. So we'll do all four of ours, but we're going to start with Warwick because that was actually our first recorded game in the archives that we could find. So Manheim Central, Warwick, October 3rd, 1992. And it's actually interesting because those teams are actually playing in week 5. So it does kind of line up. It's a little bit fitting to have this conversation right now. So that 1992 game was pretty special. Why don't you set the scene for everybody and tell us kind of why that sticks out?
Well, for the longest time in high school, football games were always played on Saturday. There were just a handful of schools, and I'm talking very few that had lights, so you would play on a Friday night. So when I played in high school and there was a Friday night game, that was pretty special because, first of all, it was a short week of practice, but then it was just something unique about running out onto the field under the lights. But at Warwick, this had been talked about, and the momentum grew, and little by little then, it started to fall into place. We saw the cement being poured, the post going up, and you thought, you know what, this is going to happen. And that first night under the lights at Warwick, it was something special. The place was packed. I mean, the amount of people that showed up for the game for both Central and Warwick just made it that much more special.
And at the time, 1992, what was the rivalry like between Manheim and Warwick? We know now that there was a time that Manheim really dominated that. But back then in 92, how was it?
Well, I mean, let's face it. Anytime you get a neighboring school, you got Warwick, Manheim Central, you get Warwick, Ephrata, Cocalico. That is something special and unique. And it's like the Army-Navy game. It really doesn't matter what the records are of these two teams, because each team is going to bring out their best regardless of how their season was prior to that ball game.
Okay, so do you remember anything significant from the game? What was it like? Did it feel like one team was kind of dominating more than the? What are is there any memories that pop into your head when you think back?
Well, I mean, this was when Manheim Central started to really start to put together a program as far as section titles, and then of course some district runs. So this was the early stages of what became a powerhouse. But again, when you have Warwick and Manheim Central, you don't need any hype. You don't need any pregame speeches and stuff like that, because these players know each other. They probably spent time together at camps and everything else. So. It's no hype needed. All you have to do is say Manheim Central, Warwick, and that should be enough.
when I look back into the stats, Manheim wins the game 30-6. And keep in mind, this is 1992, so this is that first year that Manheim goes on the run of 10 district championships in a row. Obviously, in 92, they would go on to win the district title. They win that game 30-6. They had 347 yards of total offense. Jason Thompson was the QB for Manheim Central. It's interesting, he's the baseball coach now over at Manheim Central. So had 131 yards passing, a TD pass, a TD run. There was also a name on the Warwick sideline, last name Mail. So does any of that ring a bell when you, from that game?
Yeah, and yeah, because John Mayle was not only a great football player, but a great baseball player as well, if I remember. And he was a wide out. Yeah, Jason Thompson was just one of many talented Manheim Central quarterbacks to go through the system. And, again, like I said, we got to see what was eventually the start of this long run as far as the Barons were concerned. But again, it's Manheim Central and it's Warwick, and I can kind of recall some of the action from that game. Yeah. And what we saw out of Jason Thompson is what we saw out of so many other quarterbacks. Pocket passers, but then roll out, a threat to throw, obviously, but also a threat to run. And that was just with every quarterback after him.
Oh, yeah. They went on a long run
and before him.
Solid quarterbacks. Smoker shows up at some point, and Nagy's in there at some point, and eventually, down the road we get to Simon as well, and everybody in between. All right, so let's continue on with Warwick because at one point, the losing streak did build in that Warwick-Manheim Central rivalry. Yeah. And in 2019, Warwick finally snaps that long losing streak. It just felt like a lot of the pressure was lifted. And they played them twice in that season, right? And it just seemed like Warwick had Manheim's number twice in that season. So, break it down for us. The first meeting in the regular season, and then we can go to the playoffs after that.
Well, and the span covered the losing streak covered 15 years. Now they didn't play every year, but it covered a 15-year span. So it seemed like an eternity. But each year before Warwick beat them that season, they started getting more competitive. And Bob Locker said, we're almost there. We are almost there. And there was just something in the air that night that. I think the Warwick faithful and I think the Warwick players felt, this is our night to do this, and we are finally going to put an end to it. And boy, they did in a big way. Yeah,
it was lopsided. So just to kind of break down things for everybody, it was week 3 of the 2019 season. Joey McCracken was the starting quarterback. He throws for 293 yards, 3 touchdowns, runs 1 in as well. Connor Adams had a big day, 154 yards. And Warwick starts the season 6-0. So is any of that, they win the game 37-7. Does any of that kind of bring back now just how dominant Warwick actually was in that game?
Yeah. And you could see, McCracken from his sophomore season into his junior season, and just the way he progressed and the game slowed down for him. And he had some weapons. He had Connor Adams. He had Caleb Schmitz. Forney was another guy that.
There was a Gerhardt there too, I believe.
Yeah. And they had a nice running game to balance out the passing attack. You had the Rucci boys on the team, and things just really started to swell for Warwick. And they felt, like I said, this was the year they were going to do it, and they wanted to make a statement. Yeah.
It was the first win by Warwick over Manheim since 1983. You said they hadn't played all the time, but it was. You could just imagine everybody in Lidditz, just so sick and tired of playing Manheim, and eventually they got it, and they really made it count. And then guess what? It circles back around in the playoffs. What was it? The 5A District 3 quarterfinals. Warwick's actually the 5 seed. Manheim's the 4 seed. So Warwick has to go over there. Highly competitive game. What do you remember about that rematch in the playoffs?
Well, obviously, Manheim knew that, what we went through in week 3 was we are not going to be the same team in the district playoffs, and they weren't. You could see Manheim Central got much better as the season went on. I remember being cold that night, but the intensity and the electricity in the air, which is what district playoff football is all about. I mean, there's nothing like it. But to beat, not many teams get a chance to play Manheim Central twice, let alone beat them twice in one season, and then also to do it Eldon Ratu. that's a place that's hard to win a game. But Warwick got the job done again, and it came down to Tanner Haynes and a late field goal to win it.
Yeah, first of all, it was absolutely a back and forth contest, right?
Yeah.
And so both offenses were kind of throwing everything at each other. This is the Evan Simon days over there too, so everybody knows he was going to be a stud. And the offense for Warwick had Colton Miller at running back. He had 34 rushes for 165 yards and 3 touchdowns. So clearly they were getting it done on the ground. Caleb Schmitz, you kind of brought up there. He had 6 catches, 93 yards, and a touchdown. So that's the Warwick side. Evan Simon went berserk. He had 3 touchdowns in the game. But you're right. It does come down to the last few painstaking seconds of that game, because I watched it back and there was penalties and there was all this stuff. Finally, Warwick has that field goal attempt. What are you and Coach Kaufman feeling as that's about to happen? And you know that this is a huge moment for Warwick, because they've never been to the district semifinals before.
Yeah. And it seemed like when Warwick was in the district playoffs, it seemed like every time it was either Central Dauphin or Cumberland Valley.
Right. Because they were up in the old 4A. Yeah.
Yeah. So, to see somebody new and then to see somebody you've already played, there are no secrets. You know what's coming. It's how well you can be prepared for it. And obviously, as I mentioned, Manheim Central elevated their game. They said, look, what you saw the first time out of us is not going to be the same thing. But the thing is, Warwick was ready for it. And as you just mentioned, some pretty impressive numbers from players on both teams. So it was only fitting that it came down to the final seconds.
Yeah, it was 31-28. Warwick wins. If they go to the semis, had never been there, do eventually lose to Cocalico, and Cocalico wins the district title there. So it was increasingly Warwick kept winning in the playoffs, and I think that was what was most important.